Words of joy and hope. The fifth Sunday of Lent, Year
Dal
C,
Vangelo
Gospel
secondo
according to
Giovanni.
John chapter 8, verses 1 to 11. Commentary of Father Fernando Armellini. A good Sunday to all. The Gospel passage of the adulteress, which is presented to us today, has a somewhat conflicting story. Let us try to tell it because it helps us understand how difficult it is to accept the image of God that Jesus presents to us. It is an image that we are always trying to adapt in some way according to our criteria. In the case of the adulteress, we are no longer so surprised by what Jesus said and did. It corresponds with what we think, that this adulteress was very repentant, demonstrating that she would not make the same mistake again. And that's why Jesus forgave her, gave her absolution. What happens is that there is no sign that she is repentant. The Christians of the first centuries had understood that these tricks did not work, which is why they thought of eliminating this page of the Gospel. For 2 centuries, in most of the ancient manuscripts of the Bible, the story does not appear. Only in the 3rd century, it is found in the Gospels. Why was there an attempt to leave out this episode in the church of the first 2 centuries? Why did it give so much trouble? Because it contained a discriminatory phrase pronounced by Jesus, who said to the adulteress, "I do not condemn you." St. Augustine gave a rather interesting explanation. He said that some of the faithful of little faith, or rather the enemies of the true faith, probably feared that the Lord's acceptance of this sinner would give a license of immunity to her women. In short, the husbands, responsible fathers of the community, must have thought that Jesus' phrase, "I do not condemn you," could be misinterpreted. So, better to remove it from this text. However, the real reason for the suspicion about this episode is that in the first centuries of the church, a very rigid pastoral approach had been adopted concerning forgiveness, a strict pastoral option that was not going well with the mercy that Jesus of Nazareth always showed to those who made mistakes in life. By the middle of the 2nd century, the number of Christians had greatly increased, but the quality had decreased, so that the Christians began to justify all behavior, and the grave sin committed after baptism were no longer exceptional incidents but were taken very lightly, and little importance was given to everything. This is the reason why in the Christian communities they became very strict with sinners, and 3 sins were not forgiven. Those who committed them were expelled from the community. They were denying the faith, murder, and adultery. There were also those who were more sympathetic. For example, Pope Cornelius himself, who supported a less religious and more evangelical practice. But the rigorists accused him of being an impostor who authorized people to abandon themselves to pleasures. This tension existed within the communities. There is also a book that was written in the 4th century, which is a kind of orientation manual for the clergy. It was entitled The Apostolic Constitutions, which recommended to the bishops to imitate what Jesus had done before sinners, what he had done with that woman who had sinned, and that the elders had accused her. But the prevailing trend was the rigorist trend, and we know the names of the rigorists who accused Pope Cornelius, Tertullian, and Hippolytus. Towards the middle of the second century, a very famous book appeared. The shepherd of Hermas said, "They cast out these people who have committed grave sins after baptism, and those who committed these sins had only to trust in the mercy of God. But these people wanted to get back in touch with the community, and then a practice of forgiveness was introduced, which was like a second baptism. Whoever had committed these errors had to do years of penance, fasting, mortification, prayers, and then they were reconciled with the community, but only once in their lifetime. If they sinned again afterward, they had to entrust themselves to God's mercy. In this context, if there was a text that bothered the rigorous a lot, it was the one of the adulteress that undermined the basis of their pastoral choices. Nevertheless, viewed with some suspicion, the passage continued to circulate, and it is found in several ancient copies of the Gospels. Finally, in the 3rd century, it managed to find its place in the Gospel according to John. Today, biblical scholars agree that it is not John's, but that it ended up there because nobody wanted it, and at a certain point it was placed as a chapter 8 of the Gospel according to John. The passage is from Luke, and today it is also known from where it was taken. It was initially found at the end of the 21st chapter of Luke's Gospel. Whether John or Luke wrote this passage, as was undoubtedly the case, is of no interest to us. The style, the theme, the language is typical of this evangelist. Let us listen now to how this episode is introduced.
Jesus went to Mount of Olives, but early in the morning he arrived again in the temple area. And all the people started coming to him, and he sat down and taught them.
Let us try to set the scene of this episode that created so many problems in the primitive church. The evangelist points out that Jesus comes from the Mount of Olives. He comes from the east, from where the sun rises. The Mount of Olives is 60 meters higher than the esplanade of the temple that you can see behind me. Jesus therefore comes down from the Mount of Olives, crosses the brook Kedron, and enters through the eastern gate of the esplanade of the temple. Along this eastern side was the famous Solomon's porch, which is mentioned in the Gospel according to John and in the Acts of the Apostles. Under this portico sat the rabbis to give their instructions on the Bible and give legal advice to those who asked for it. Notice that next to the eastern gate of this entrance in the temple esplanade is shown the first building, and then another similar building at the entrance of the women's court. They were called the higher courts. In each these buildings, every day, from morning to evening, 23 judges met to resolve the most important cases. In every city, there were courts of justice, and even in the synagogues, verdicts were pronounced. But in serious cases, it was necessary to go to Jerusalem, where justice was administered in the name of God and according to the provisions of the Torah. The third building is also indicated, even more important. There below was the famous Hall of the Hewn Stones, or chamber of hewn stone. In Hebrew, it is Lishkat Hagasit, as shown in the inset. It was the place where the Sanhedrin met. It consisted of 71 judges presided over by the high priest, who at the time of Jesus was Caiaphas. The Synhedrium could also pronounce death sentences, but to execute this sentence, it had to request authorization from the Roman governor, as it will happen in the case of Jesus. In Jerusalem, justice was always administered in the name of God, even in the time of the kings. Let us remember Psalm 122, the pilgrim who arrives at the Mount of Olives and says, I rejoiced when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. And then, contemplating the temple of the Lord, and on the right hand of the temple, the king's palace, where justice was administered, he says, there are the thrones of justice, the thrones of the house of David. In fact, the king pronounced sentences in the name of God. When he came to the throne, he was not a legislator. He only had to enforce the law of God. On the day of his coronation, he was given a copy of this word of God which he had to enforce. In this temple, justice was applied in the name of God. Right there, he will witness a conflict between two ways of understanding justice, that of the scribes and Pharisees who appeal to the law and who are convinced that they represent the thought and judgment of God, and another, righteousness which God Himself now pronounces. Let us note the symbolic nature of this, the details in which this narrative is framed, the hour at which Jesus comes to show what is the true justice of God. It is in the morning when the new day dawns, when the judges gather in those three buildings that I have indicated to you to speak in the name of God. This light comes from the Mount of Olives. It is the new light that is now projected upon the face of God. Not the light that is projected upon the face of God, projected by the rabbis, the righteous God. It will be another light that arises on this new day. Jesus now enters the temple and sits down. He assumes the position of the master. Where did he sit? Under which porch? We don't know. But we can imagine that he sat in that north entrance that is indicated. Let us listen now to what happened.
Then the scribe and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and make her stand in the middle. They said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say? They said this to test him so that they could have some charge to bring against him.
Now comes on the scene some characters that we know very well, the scribes and the Pharisees. We already met them last Sunday when they were indignant because Jesus welcomed tax collectors and sinners into his house and feasted with them. They could not stand the image of a God who, instead of punishing sinners, celebrated with them. In today's passage, they caught a woman to present her to Jesus to put him in difficulties. They caught a woman in flagrant adultery. They didn't catch the man because they didn't care about the man, nor the woman in question either. Here it is not about the woman's adultery, but about the image of God that Jesus preaches, the righteousness of God that Jesus announces. They cannot accept it. The adultery of this woman is only an excuse to set a trap for Jesus. They put the woman in the middle, the evil in the center of attraction, and in front of this evil, they want him to speak out. Two ways of doing justice will be confronted: the scribes and Pharisees, and then that of Jesus. What do the scribes and Pharisees propose to do away with evil? They say, Master, this woman has been surprised in the act of adultery, and Moses in the law has commanded us to dilapidate women who are like this. Therefore, the law, the Torah, commands us to solve the problem by suppressing those who behave in this way. What was in dispute was whether it was by stoning or strangulation. As the Mishnah says, the book of Leviticus in chapter 20 says that if one commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. The woman must have been greatly ashamed to be there in the middle, and also a little afraid because they were savages who had captured her. But she wasn't afraid of being stoned because, in fact, the death sentence that we find in the Bible were not carried out. After all, the book of the Talmud, which is a holy book that collects the holy traditions of Israel, states that a Sanhedrin decreeing a death sentence every 70 years would be considered extreme and excessively severe. A death penalty every 70 years. They were not carried out. When the Torah imposes the death penalty, it is not a sentence to be followed, but a felony. The death penalty, as it is written in the Bible, was even for one who slaps his father or mother, or one who violates the law or the Sabbath. These death sentences were never carried out. It was only to point out the gravity of the evil that was done. The Torah serves to point out the evil. It tells you, see that this fruit is poisoned. If the Torah tells you not to commit adultery and that you will suffer the death penalty, this sentence will not be carried out, but it means that you are poisoning your life. Therefore, the warning that Torah gives is precious because it tells you to take care of yourself from a poison. Therefore, the woman should not have been too afraid. She knew she could be punished but not killed. Therefore, we are before the evil which is placed in the middle, and now the scribes' proposition to solve the world's evil, to eradicate it definitively. What is it? Let us eliminate the one who does it. It's the simplest way to solve the problem. Justice is done by blaming the guilty. That is, to make him understand that he should not do evil. He does evil, to make him know that one should not make others suffer, and he is made to suffer. To make him understand that he must not kill, he is killed, the death penalty. Those who reason in this way also believe that they have the law of Moses on their side. The question to Jesus: we have made our proposal to do away with evil by suppressing those who do it. But what do you say? How do you do justice? And the evangelist's account goes on to say that they said this to him to test him, to have a motive to accuse him. Thus, the target, egrasein in Greek, is to set a trap for him. And they think that they have trapped him because he either disavows the image of God, who loves sinner and the tax collector, and therefore also changes his life, or he speaks out against the Torah. If he speaks out against the Torah, the Sanhedrin is two steps away, so it will be easy to catch him. They bring him before the high priest and receive exemplary punishment. They have asked him, "So what do you say?" Let us see how Jesus proceeds. He does not answer their question but makes a strange gesture. Let us listen. Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. But when they continued asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he bent down and wrote on the ground. And in response, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. So he was left alone with the woman before him. Then Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She replied, "No one, sir." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore." Jesus was asked a question to which he did not answer. He began to write with his finger on the ground. In his place, we would probably have immediately begun to argue with the scribes and Pharisees, showing that their interpretation of the Torah was incorrect, or we would have reproved them for all their evil intentions. We would have said, "See, I have noticed that you do not care for the adulterous woman. What you want is to condemn me. I am aware of that." Jesus has two objectives: to save the woman, of course, because she belongs to the group that the scribes and Pharisees consider Jesus' friends, the friend of tax collectors and sinners. And so Jesus will not be able to appear before his friends, and so he must save the woman. The other objective is to save his accusers because Jesus loves them. He wants them to be happy. He wants everyone to assimilate and accept with joy the new image of God, a God who relates differently with those who do evil compared to what they think. What does he do? He puts in place a very effective pedagogy. The first step, he knows that he is facing a group, and we all know what the law of the group is. People get together and they start to do unpleasant things and also terrible things, and they don't feel responsible because it was the group and not me. The first thing to do to get them back is to take them out of the group, start making them reflect, make them aware that they are responsible for what they do. That is then the first sense of Jesus' gesture. It is the silence that is created around him. Silence is scary because if nothing distracts you, then you must reflect, you must think. And it is easy then that comes to the surface some disturbing thoughts that you have always tried to eliminate. It is like Jesus says, "Stop for a moment. In the silence, do some reflection. Think about it. Try to ask yourself, what moved you to bring this woman here? The woman has hurt herself and her husband. Maybe she ruined her family and other families. By putting her there in the middle, did you solve anything? Did you think of doing her any good? Did you think you were helping her to recover in life? Or Maybe with your behavior, you add more evil to what she has already done. How is it that you are so dissatisfied with her while she has done nothing wrong to you? If you think about the reasons why you have brought her here, maybe you will be ashamed of what you have done. Don't hide in the group. Come out. Look inside yourself. And the accusers do not stand this silence. In fact, the narration says that they started to interrogate him. They can't stand the silence, it unsettles them. The Greek text says epimenon. Epimenein means they fell on him. Then Jesus lifts his head and says, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." This is how Jesus proceeds to break up the group. Not that they stone her all at once, but one at a time. After thinking if they conclude that they are totally different from her, that they have no sins, that they are pure, upright, and the solution for evil is the one they propose. That is to say, to eliminate the one who does it, then be careful, because if you too are sinners, then you too must be eliminated. I want to make a reflection for our days, for the group that is so often present today, even in the Christian communities. This group must be dissolved. The group that throws the stones of heresy, not of slander. I hope it will not come to that point in the Christian communities, but gossip, the spreading of errors that have come to our knowledge. These people must face their conscience, and before throwing these stones with their tongues, let them think about it. Do you want to do good to the people whose mistakes you punish? Are you sure that one day there will not be somebody to throw stones at you? The last spicy news you spread, do you do it for the sake of your brother or sister, or for a pathological satisfaction that you feel and that in the end leaves a bitter taste in your heart when you broadcast the evil that a brother or sister has done? Try asking yourself if you would be happy if these stones were thrown at you one day. After having asked that, not all together but one at a time, throw the stones. After having said this, Jesus returns to write on the ground with his finger. Then we wonder what the meaning is of what Jesus does, because the story is short. Twice his gesture is recalled. The interpretations that have been given are many. The most traditional one is that of Jerome, who had said that Jesus began to write in the sand the sins of the accusers. And then clearly the elders, who were the first to be struck by Jesus, went away all ashamed. Jesus does no wrong by writing things to shame the accusers. Jesus loves them. He wants to save them. He wants to liberate them, not humiliate them. On the other hand, he couldn't write in the sand because in the esplanade of the temple there was no sand. The ground was paved with stones. So the finger of Jesus was moving on the stone. We must stick to the text that does not say what he wrote. It simply says that he wrote with his finger on the stone. The reference is clearly to the only text in the Bible where the finger of God writes on the stone, on the two tablets the Decalogue. The Decalogue is the indication that tells you how you must live, the mistakes you must avoid. The poison that takes your life is indicated to you by the Torah, but written in stone. These people know that when the finger of God moved, He wrote the law on stone. With this gesture, Jesus is asking, are you still stuck to the law written on the stone? Do you not remember what the prophet Jeremiah said, who announced that one day God would write His law not on the stone but the heart? Then, when the law is not external to a man but is within his heart, this heart impels him to do good. With his gesture, Jesus says to the accusers, ask yourselves, are your heart still made of stones, or do you have a heart that has now been transformed, a new heart that has assimilated the thoughts and the feelings of God? And these people, when they heard Jesus and saw that He began to write again, they began to turn away, beginning with the elders, the presbyters, says the Greek text, not because they were the first to be ashamed, but because they are the first who understood and were converted by Jesus. Jesus achieved this first objective. Now, Jesus is left alone with the woman, and the position of the two is important. The woman has been standing, and Jesus had been sitting. During the whole discussion with the accusers, during the trial, the woman had always remained standing with other people, and Jesus was seated. He had bowed twice, always remaining seated. The translation says, Jesus straightened up. Jesus looked up, still seated. He remained down, the woman up. Let us notice that in Luke's Gospel, we also find Jesus standing below and the sinner above with Zacchaeus. When Zacchaeus is in the sycamore tree, Jesus looks up because God is always below for a sinner because He loves him. He is at the service of those who have gone wrong. This is the image of God that Jesus presents to us. He looks up and says to the woman, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She replied, no one, sir. Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on do not sin anymore. Let us correctly interpret the sentence that Jesus pronounced. Neither do I condemn you. It is the famous discriminatory sentence. First of all, let us not invent the repentance of the woman and promise the intention to sin no more, the absolution by Jesus of her sins. None of this makes any sense. There is no sign of repentance in the woman. Moreover, with repentant sinners, even the Pharisees were very understandable. Here we have another clear message. Jesus clearly and distinctly distinguishes between sin and the sinner. Jesus disapproves of the evil that has been done. He does not justify the sin. Adultery is a grave sin. It does much harm to those who commit it and can have dramatic consequences. It can break up families with effects that then have repercussions on the children and the children's children. Let us remember how strict and demanding Jesus' sexual morality is. In the Sermon on the Mount, it goes far beyond what the rabbis said. Not only condemns adultery, but calls adultery the evil desire because it is in the heart where begins the process that leads to the betrayal of conjugal love. Jesus agrees with the Torah that denounces evil, that indicates what poison is, and in fact, he tells the woman, "Do no more evil to yourself, but though you commit it 1,000 times, I will never condemn you, because God condemns evil, but not his sons and daughters." This is the new image of God that Jesus introduced in the world. God does not do justice by tearing apart and sending to hell his children who have made mistakes. This is not doing justice. This is a way of revenge. Let us not go back to recover the image of God that the scribes and Pharisees have in mind. Jesus took the stones out of our hands. We cannot throw them to others. Perhaps some people think that in the end, Jesus himself will be the one who throws the stones, that one day God will punish us. Let us stop projecting our evil on God. Jesus paid with his life the proclamation of the God who is love and only love, love that will never condemn any of his sons and daughters. One day they shall bring him before the Sanhedrin, and not now, when he pronounced the sentence of not condemning the adulteress. But on the day they will condemn him precisely for the proclamation of the image of the true God, who loves and only loves. The God who has asked us not to condemn anybody, and we shall not be condemned. He is the first to practice this command that he gave to us. Never condemn people when they go astray and make mistakes, but help them recover in life. This is to do justice, not to excuse it. If we accept and welcome this image of God, we will calm our hearts, as John says in his first letter. If our hearts condemn us, we know that God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. I wish you all a good Sunday and a good week.